get out and live in that big house with a big yard.
Look at their suicide rates, their addiction rates, their depression rates. I mean, seriously, if you look at those, alcoholism, depression, suicide in affluent neighborhoods, I mean, it's astronomical. It's brutal.
Boy, but try to convince people to abandon that way. That's where it's really odd. It seems like so counterintuitive to them. It's like, no, you're going to live in a safe neighborhood. No, you're going to have a big house. You're going to have a nice car and a great job. You're going to do great.
Well, think about it in evolutionary terms. The impulse towards safety and luxury is a totally healthy one in a situation where nature doesn't offer that very often.
Right.
So we're programmed to go for those things, right? What we're not prepared for is to go for those things and have it happen all the time.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? Like, these are totally healthy instincts, of course, right? But we didn't evolve in a world where you could actually achieve that 100% of the time. I mean, dogs are programmed, a lot of dog species are programmed, will eat until they've eaten so much that they'll kill themselves eating, right? It's because there wasn't enough food to do. Like, the programming to keep eating as long as there's food is great if there's a scarcity of food.
Right.
Right? As soon as there's a plenitude of food, that becomes maladaptive and the dog dies. And, likewise, people put fat on very easily because in a harsh environment with not much food, you have to be able to put fat on easily or you'll die. Now, with the reason there's so many obese people is because we have that impulse to eat and eat and eat. And the food's there to do it with, and we don't have the mechanism for stopping it. And so that's why there's so many fat people.
Well, it's also sugar. That's a big one.
Yeah, of course.
Sugar.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But our taste for sugar and for fat is programmed by evolution, right? Because there wasn't much of those things. So now you can have as much as you want, and suddenly people weigh 350 pounds, right? I mean, it's evolutionary programming run amok in a world where there's too much of something that is very good but was very scarce.
You highlight some really profound issues with culture in your book, but I would wonder how many people come up to you after they've read it and go, "What do I do?" Like, you're right, but what do I do? I mean, here I am. I'm this guy. I have this house. Yeah. I have a mortgage. I have kids. I have a job that's good, and I don't want to leave it. But what do I do? Because you're right. I'm fucking miserable. What do I do? Like, what do you tell those people?
I mean, it really a question of you can't have it all. And well, I mean, what I would say to them is, sell your house, sell your car if you can, move into a community where you have to be interreliant with the people around you, and you have to interact with them every day. Like, that is what makes people feel good. But the thing is, people are understandably not willing to give up the pleasures of an affluent life in order to have social connection. I mean, I get it, right? But you really can't have both very successfully. It's extremely hard to.
Yeah, I have a buddy of mine who lived in Venice in a real nice, tight-knit community. They had this cul-de-sac, and everybody lived in the everyone knew everybody.
I live in a cul-de-sac. They're great.
And he started doing well. And the first thing he did, he moved out, and he got this really nice house and this big yard, and he fucking hates it, and he's miserable. When we talk about it, he goes, "I fucking hate it." Yeah. He goes, "I don't know my neighbors." He goes, "I have this big yard. I just stare at it and go back inside my house." He goes, "I used to know everyone on the block. I knew everyone in the community."
Yeah, that's right. Well, that guy that lifestyle is correlated with higher depression and suicide rates. I mean, he's literally at a statistical risk, increased statistical risk of suicide and depression because of that change.
Wow. So you, regardless of how much money you would make, you would always move into a neighborhood where people are relying upon each other and stay tight to each other?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Wow.
I mean, it's not even
no way.
It's not even a choice. Yeah. I just get instantly depressed in affluent neighborhoods.
Wow. That's so crazy.
Yeah. I mean, I crash. I mean, hard.
Do you accumulate any material possessions? Or are you one of those dudes who has like a notebook and a couple of pairs of shoes?
Minimally, but yeah, I mean, we live in a very small apartment, so there's not room for much, but,
and you're happy with that?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, listen, the less you have, the happier you are.
Wow.
I mean, at the end of the day, you can probably make that as a empirically true statement.
Empirically true? Really?
Yeah. And I'm not talking about poverty, lack of food, lack of resources. I mean, I'm obviously
of course,
not talking about that. I'm talking about material possessions.
Right, stuff, right? Cars and boats and shit. I always feel like once you get a boat, you're probably falling apart. It's like... You know what I mean? Like, dudes, unless you're a fisherman, you're going out there and getting a boat. It's like, what? You just, what are you doing?
Well, it's interesting. Like that kind of material, those kind of material possessions also, I mean, again, evolution, right? Like, particularly for males in the society, if you control resources, you have a reproductive advantage over males that don't control resources, and girls will like you better, right? So when you're an 18-year-old boy, the instinct to get a car, to get a boat, maybe one day to get a private airplane, whatever, that instinct has huge evolutionary advantage because it gives you access to women, right? Not all women, but enough so that it's a great strategy for meeting girls, right?
Right.
The problem is that once you're sort of further on in your life and you have children, you have a family, if you don't have a community and what you have instead is a huge lawn, an overpowered boat, and a ridiculously expensive car, you have taken things that were a definite reproductive advantage at 18, and you have dragged them into midlife, where instead of making you feel good, they will depress you. In my opinion, like that's what happens to those guys. So it's not that those things are a stupid idea at an earlier point in your life, but definitely when you're 50 years old, again, I'm sure like you could correlate, if you did the proper study, you could make a correlation between those kinds of material possession and alcohol abuse, depression, suicide, all that stuff.
I wonder if that's the case with like rappers and people that grow up in these poor black communities that go on to have insane material wealth. I've always been fascinated by the ridiculous hip hop culture of just giant houses and 50 cars and throwing money up into the air and just this celebration of excess coming from a place of nothing and having this deep desire to achieve all those things that seemed unattainable.
Look, I mean, I think athletes have the same problem too. And particularly, I mean, they have the fraternity of their team until they retire. And apparently retired athletes, professional athletes, are at real risk of depression.
Yes.
I mean, listen, I met a young woman who had survived cancer, and she said to me rather sheepishly, she said, when I was sick, she was on a cancer ward, and she knew all the other cancer sufferers on the ward, and her family and basically her tribe rallied around her. She didn't know if she was going to survive. She was down there going chemo and all that awful, awful stuff. And she looked at me sort of sheepishly and said, and I survived, and now I miss being sick. She missed the community of cancer sufferers on that ward, and her own